Alrighty, good morning, folks. Um, I thought I'd record a few thoughts on what looks like the future effects of Mars and Jupiter hitting where Pluto and Saturn are and conjuncted earlier this year. So as we know, Pluto and Saturn conjuncted around 19 degrees of Capricorn last month, and that will have ramifications for the U.S. for many years to come, obviously, including the impeachment of Donald Trump. And those will unfold over many years. That seems obvious as well. However, in the more near term, what's coming up is that Jupiter and Mars, as you can see in the chart here, will be conjuncting Pluto and then Saturn. And so by anybody's definitions, but I of course was looking at Rob Hand's stuff, these two together is obviously opportunity and power at the same time, and conjunct Pluto, it would seem that it's inevitable to seek power but also to confront it at the same time and to not be able to avoid confrontations. So I thought I'd look at, first of all, the chart that we're looking at here is the Georgia primary, which is after Super Tuesday and after South Carolina and Nevada. But it's my opinion that even though Super Tuesday will shake out most of the candidates, it may not be clear until this hits, and this hits right around March 24th, which is the Georgia primary, and where Biden was heavily favored in previous years. So let's take a look at what the effects of this might be in terms of the candidates, and maybe other peripherals around it. And what I want to kind of separate the candidates into is those that might have a positive boost from this, those that have a neutral effect on their charts, and those that might have a negative effect on their charts. So let's take the first look at Bloomberg. In his chart, he has Saturn at 21 degrees of Taurus, and so Venus is going to be on his Saturn, looking at his money, obviously, and trine the transiting Saturn. And so the Saturn at this point will have made it into Aquarius, 0 degrees, and it will be semi-sextile his sun sign, and his moon is also in Aquarius. So although it will give a hard look at whether his philanthropy has been very real, it will also obviously talk about his accomplishments in the philanthropic area. Saturn rewards when you have done the work of your Saturn. In his case, Saturn in Taurus is a lot of money, but double Aquarius is the philanthropist. So this day looks good for him, or at least not malefic, so to speak, even though Saturn coming over his sun sign which is at pretty far away at 24 degrees. Um, Probably will not affect him heavily. So it looks good for him that day. I would next look at Joe Biden. His birthday is November 20th, 1942. By the way, for my young astrologers who are all on the internet, this is called an ephemeris. You can flip any page anytime. Oh, let me look up so and so. You don't have to go online. You don't have to do another calculation. I recommend this is the American ephemeris. Okay, and that's this one's a 50-year from 2000 to 2050. And so I can look up the current transits just by flipping to a page. But okay, that's my rant for today, astrology rant. Anyways, Joe Biden. It doesn't look bad for him. He's got Saturn at 11, down to 9 degrees of Gemini. So it's neither. It's in a quincunx sign, but not anywhere in orb of that. His Jupiter, though, is in Cancer at 25 degrees. So he's on a Jupiter opposition, and unlike some of the more superficial positives that people talk about, the Jupiter opposition as optimistic time, as going outside of yourself, as a little bit over the top sometimes. To me, it's swimming in seas where you're learning new mechanisms of being, let's say, and as in any opposition, it's not under your control, and you sometimes need the help of others to push through that situation. For me, once that Jupiter opposition opposite my Jupiter in Taurus was bankruptcy, and that was because of the housing bust that hit Detroit harder than many places. And to get out of Detroit, I had to just leave. So that was when Jupiter was in Scorpio. So Jupiter opposition is not always this exuberant positive time. At any rate, obviously it's going to be exactly opposite his Jupiter. And so, well, we can see what he brings to the table in terms of experience, in terms of patriotism, in terms of family values. All good. The opposition may say it's not your time, Joe, and we'll find out. That's likely going to happen, although we've seen the worst of it already with Saturn transiting opposite his Jupiter. So if anything positive comes out of the Jupiter opposite Jupiter, it will be a recovery time for him to make the adjustments and be the comeback kid. We'll see. I have my doubts, but I could be wrong. I don't think astrology would take a stance one way or the other, because the opposition does bring growth, opportunity, and lots of energy outside of yourself. So in his case, obviously, it's going to take a lot of help from the party and other people chiming in. The next candidate I would look at is Amy Klobuchar. Now, she's a double Gemini, Sun and Moon in Gemini, born in 1960. She has Mars at about 11 degrees of Aries, Jupiter in Capricorn, so she's under Jupiter return, and Saturn at 17 degrees retrograde of Capricorn. So apart from the current positioning in her candidacy, we also, in general, see the effect of the second Saturn return. and where Jupiter is in that return. So in this case, she had her Saturn return just before her Jupiter return, and so you tend to see the downside with the Saturn return. It's going to eliminate what doesn't work in your life, so that you can go on and make the choices that do work in your life. Now, often at that age, 58 to 60, a person is not going to change careers. So they're going to see whether they're going to be able to go on in the field where they chose to stay in, so to speak. And so now Jupiter is coming along, and her Jupiter's at, she's had her Jupiter return as well, but it's now going to be in Capricorn for a while. Hers is at, let me pause, at 2 degrees of Capricorn, so it's already hit, but it still has gone over her Saturn at 18 degrees and is still giving that beneficial boost to her campaign. So in that sense, in her Capricorn energy, I think she's hit the downside, the worst side, and can only go up from here. However, she has Mars in Aries, and that's going to be square her Mars. And her Mars is at early degrees, at 10 degrees, so it's already squared that. We have a couple of candidates with Aries in their charts, and I'm seeing sort of the negatives that are going on with the Capricornian status quo energy versus the new kid on the block, Aries. So we see the moon that day at the end of the day in Georgia, the moon on her Mars at 10 degrees, but squaring not anywhere near by degree, but by sign, this Capricorn energy still. I would say it's a toss-up. By that time, I do think the moon being on her Mars will show us the end game of her candidacy, but not the end of it. It will show us whether she's at the end of the candidacy or not. It's not entirely negative, and there's a couple other candidates we'll look at as well with the Mars or the Aries energy. We'll see. It in some ways it shines on her Saturn, Jupiter in Capricorn, which was close to the same age group that President Obama came from. And they're all on their Saturn returns right now. So Saturn rewards when it's done the hard work, but also she did the hard work as a prosecutor in her home state of Minnesota, and she's being criticized for that right now. So again, she lands in the toss-up column in terms of astrology, but I think her efficacy will be clear, and she's pretty obviously a vice presidential candidate at this point if she doesn't rise to the top of the heap by Georgia, which is March 24th. Let's take a look at Pete Buttigieg. Interesting character. He's got he's actually a Capricorn. Oops, sorry. Born January 19th, 1982. His sun sign is 28 degrees Capricorn. So Saturn has just gone over his sun sign. Mars will be hitting it soon. that's great accomplishment, but that's also a downside as well. And his natal Saturn is exactly square that, not exact, but 22 degrees of Libra, with Mars in Libra as well. Will this Saturn square and Saturn on his sun sign cause him to start to lose according to his sexuality, as people look a little harder at that as we get to the more conservative states? I tend to think so, but let's look at both sides of it. Saturn in Capricorn or in Aquarius is in its original or traditional rulership. Now, a counter example is a Renaissance festival that I tried to get into back in 2005. It was a new festival in western Pennsylvania, and the organizer was an 8 degrees Leo. And during the opening day of the festival, Saturn was at 8 degrees of Leo. Well, the festival flopped. Wasn't necessarily his fault, just more Saturn saying oversaturation of market, bad timing, bad place, not enough money, whatever. It didn't go. We all lost a little bit of money there, but it was an adventure. Saturn here on his sun sign is saying more, this is what I've accomplished, and this is my direction, and this is firmly who I am and what I'm doing. And so I don't see Saturn as a negative in its own sign, because it's obvious he has some accomplishments and intelligence to go on. But I do see the square to the Libra, which is the gay partnership, as an impediment to his election. So I think I'm putting him in that maybe category, and we'll find out by either, in his case, Super Tuesday, or later in the Georgia primary, that he did not rise to the top at that point. I know that's a prediction which I actually, as an astrologer, hate to do because life is too complicated. But in terms of all of these candidates, which includes Tulsi Gabbard, Bernie Sanders, I think Elizabeth Warren has some Aries, Buttigieg with the Libra, the squares to the Saturn, is what worries me with these candidates in the upcoming time period. Now, Elizabeth Warren is an interesting case and candidate. She's a 0 degrees Cancer sun with Saturn sextile at 0 degrees of Virgo. And so it's pretty obvious that the Saturn is going to be quincunx. It's going to make a yod. So this Saturn here at 0 of Aquarius is going to be in a yod to her sun sign and her Saturn, and that's the finger of destiny. The North Node is going to be on her, very close to her sun sign. Those are both positives for her. One of the negatives is that she has Venus at 18 degrees of Cancer, and so this will be opposing, and so it's kind of obvious right now that she's, except for her crowd, not as well liked in the field, not as well respected. Her North Node itself is, though, again with this Aries squares, the North Node, her North Node is at 24 degrees of Aries, and it's going to be exactly squared by that Mars, which rules Aries. And so, will she be conservative enough to be accepted by the field? She does take corporate money. That'll be called out again in the next few weeks. Will her plans be seen with the Aries as pie in the sky? She's not as pie in the sky as Bernie Sanders is, which, by the way, I favor. But it's an obvious huge shift in the budget of the United States to take on health care for all. So I think that this, and not forgetting that I didn't use any rising signs here, so I'm not sure if there are other factors out there. But I think that Jupiter will hit her natal Jupiter. And let me pause here. I think I need to look that up. Yes, I wasn't sure my notes were right, but her Jupiter's at 1 degree of Aquarius. And so Saturn will be on her Jupiter that day. Is that a negative? It's certainly a ceiling. But again, highlights her humanitarian drives, along with the Cancer, Virgo, Moon and Taurus practicality that she has with financial systems. So I think this is the most unique chart, with a given set of positives, negatives, and so to speak, the finger of fate, yod. I hate to predict. Prediction is so complicated in astrology because life is so complicated. But if she ends up as the vice presidential nominee, I wouldn't be surprised, because she has some of the most distinctive positives going on in her chart as well. Finally, we have Tulsi Gabbard, and she is a Sun-Mars conjunction in Aries with the Moon in Leo. So obviously a fiery, firm, positive of her values candidate. But this is where we see Mars squaring her Mars by the Georgia primary, probably even before. Her Mars is at 19 degrees, so it'll be squaring. Let me use my handy dandy current astrology or ephemeris, and so the Jupiter will be squaring on Super Tuesday, March 3rd, her Mars, and in between, by the 15th, the Mars squares her Mars. Common sense would tell us that it's not looking great for Tulsi, in some ways due to her inability to be flexible in terms of how she sees the politics of war. There have been many side stories about her being connected to Russia, and even our whiner-in-chief, and I don't mean Trump, I mean Hillary Clinton, won't go away and slammed her for that. Clinton's being sued for that, but it still may have had an effect. I see this as finalizing with the Sun and the Mars together there. That's just too potent a square to the current transits of that election day. So either by March 3rd or by March 24th, she'll be out of the race. That's a prediction, but obviously based on current reality, whether I was looking at astrology or not. So, how does it look? It looks to me. Oh, we didn't do Bernie. I'm sorry. So Bernie Sanders is a Virgo with a Mars, Moon, and Aries. And apart from election politics, it kind of shows you what that combination is like in a chart. A prickly idealist, a perfectionist, and it's been jokingly talked about throughout the whole campaign that he's not easy to like. I had some of the opposite as a grandmother, an Aries with Moon in Virgo. Same perfectionism, same idealism, not easy to like. But one could respect her values. At any rate, that Mars is looking like 23 degrees of Aries. I'm not sure where the moon is without a time. Exactly square the Mars Pluto going on here. Even though he's in the lead in terms of popular vote so far, I think unfortunately Super Tuesday and the Georgia primary will shake him out, and by the end of that he may not be anywhere near the top of the heap in terms of the primary race. So in conclusion, that leaves Biden, Klobuchar, and Bloomberg in a way as having positives or having the least effect on their charts, and they may rise to the top at that point. I could be wrong, but I think these squares to Buttigieg's Mars and to Bernie's Mars and to Warren's North Node, and it's pretty obvious to Tulsi's Mars Sun, are all going to cut them out of the conservative pack that's going to take the day as all this is still in Capricorn. Now, what is interesting is that Saturn is going to go back into Capricorn throughout the year, and we don't get this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction until after the election. So throughout the whole year, we're going to have the question of conservatism versus the new progressive ideal as everything goes into Aquarius. I would hope the progressives would win, but I have my doubts. I don't think I put my personal preferences into this too much, but my preferences are obviously to beat Trump with a progressive agenda, which is actually Warren or Biden. I'm sorry, Sanders. I don't think that's going to happen, according to this shakeout of March 24th. Now, I'll comment on the two Georgia senators. We have two races here in Georgia, and this is the Georgia primary that day. So we'll take a quick look at that. So in the race number 2, as we're calling it here in Georgia, Kelly Loeffler is the appointee that took Isaacson's seat, and she is a Sagittarius with Moon in Scorpio, Mars at 23 degrees of Libra, exactly square where this Mars is going to be. She also has Saturn at 18 degrees of Taurus, which is minimally with orbs trine that she has a ton of money, the Saturn in Taurus, and she's willing to spend it. She owns the Rockers, I think. Was it women's basketball or women's football? I'm not sure which. I don't follow that, but one of the big sports teams, and her husband's the president of the New York Stock Exchange. So they've got the money. Other than the Mars square, which in my previous assessments I did not see as a very positive thing. In her case, knowing the politics of Georgia, now that I've been here for a while, I don't think the square here to her Mars is going to overcome the trine to the Saturn, trining her natal Saturn at 18 degrees of Taurus. So I think she'll keep the seat. But let's take a look at her opponent, Doug Collins, who was born a Leo, double Leo, Sun and Moon in Leo in 1966. Doug Collins, as I don't know much about him, he's from the Gainesville, Georgia, so semi-rural area. Was apparently quite well liked, generally, up until his almost maniacal defense of Trump during the impeachment trial. And so you saw the negative side of the double Leo, which was going to stubbornly hold on to their line as long as they could. Now, the politics here is interesting. He's got a Jupiter-Mars conjunct at 22 degrees of Cancer. And so that's obviously over here, opposite the Jupiter-Mars over here. So he's on a Jupiter opposition and a Mars opposition at the same time. I think one could say that the Mars opposition is the performance he put on during the impeachment. He made, frankly, a total ass of himself, and everybody here kind of knows it. But like the senators, don't want to talk about it in the Republican Party. But at the same time, they're angry and shocked that he has put up this bid for the Senate seat that Loeffler just got, and the majority here are supporting. The majority of the party officials are supporting Loeffler. And then the Jupiter opposition, that's a whole other video in terms of what the Jupiter opposition actually means. But it's often, obviously, at age 6, at age 18, at age 30, with the Saturn return, it's quite often being as far out from your comfort zone as you can possibly be, and getting maybe put back into your place in some ways, or being shown what your place is. Think of age 18 as a college freshman, finds out that college is actually real study, not high school. At any rate, I don't think he's going to get the nomination. Georgia has a funny, I think they call it a swamp primary or something. It doesn't matter which party wins. The top two contenders, if they don't get over 50%, have a runoff the following March, I think. And so it'll probably be Loeffler and whoever rises to the pack, and that happens to be probably right now the Baptist preacher that Reverend Warnock that preaches at Martin Luther King's church here in Atlanta. I haven't looked at his chart yet, but I was just comparing Loeffler to to Collins. But the politics is that they will find something else for Collins. And I think that the Jupiter-Mars opposite, his natal Jupiter-Mars, pretty much says, not this time, buddy. So we'll see by March 24th, or probably many of these will shake out on March 3rd on the Super Primary Day or Super Tuesday. But they'll be written in stone by this Georgia primary. That's all on this subject today. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm just new at this since I've just semi-retired and Sorry, crisis with my bandmates. I'll perhaps edit that. Anyways, thanks for listening. Subscribe to my channel so I can get some of this energy going. And my next video, I might go back to talking about the Uranus and Taurus. Ta.